Good afternoon. I'm the Reverend Charisma Jean-Marie, and I serve as the Director for Racial Justice Ministries, the Scarritt Bennett Center in Nashville, Tennessee. And thank you for joining us again for another live stream conversation on our Facebook page. This afternoon is a very important conversation. It's a conversation that we will have entitled Raising Co-Conspirators. Our framework here at Scarritt Bennett Center is that we believe in shifting the narrative from white allyship to co-conspirator. Co-conspiratorship is not a title, but a way of life. Persons who are dedicated to dismantling white supremacy and specifically for Black communities healing from racial trauma. To be a co-conspirator, you have to first acknowledge that racism exists in all of us, that we all are drinking and living in this racist water, racist society. And we are intentionally about doing the work of dismantling white supremacy in our midst, systemically, institutionally, and the like. And so I want to say thank you again for joining us as we dive into this conversation, specifically this afternoon with children, young people, the young people in our lives. Research shows that children at the young age of 6 months already identify the difference in skin color. So at 6 months, children can already identify difference in skin color. And before they even learn how to speak, you are teaching them what Kendi Imbru says around being an anti-racism, being an anti-racist. You're teaching them either to be a racist or anti-racist. And that is intentional work. And so even in conversations, even around the election this week, children are in this conversation. They're paying attention to what you're saying and what you're doing, how you're voting, how you're referring to people on camera, off camera. Children are in the midst. Children are already part of this conversation. And so we thought it would be important for us to bring in young people in our lives to model what conversations, intentional conversations, can look like. And what does it mean to raise co-conspirators in our lives, in our homes, in our classrooms, in our community? That's what this conversation is about. So let me go ahead and say thank you to each and every one of our panelists for joining us this afternoon. I'm already impressed with the young people who are here, and I believe you, our audience too, will be impressed. And as always, this is Sacred Space. We welcome you to our sacred space, and you're welcome to join in the conversation. You're welcome to offer your thoughts and even questions in the comment sections of our live stream. And while difference of opinions are always welcome in this space, difference of opinions does not mean hate or disrespect. So any comments that reflect hate or disrespect, we will delete immediately. For radical hospitality is our way here at Scarritt Bennett Center. We take serious intending and caring for our guests while they're in our presence. So again, thank you for joining us. And I want to welcome all of our panelists and Justin, who will come and moderate this conversation. Justin, thank you again for being here another week. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Charisma. I really appreciate being here. And thank you again to the Scarritt Bennett Center for hosting this incredible event. Again, I want to really highlight today, as we think about this conversation, the importance of listening to children, to listening to the kids in our lives, to the young people in our lives. As a teacher, I work with students and kids on a regular day-to-day basis, and some of the ideas that they produce are things that I think many adults can benefit from, right? But often we think, well, kids don't have enough knowledge, or they don't have the context or the understanding. And so we come up with these ideas or these reasonings as to why we don't want to include kids on tough conversations, why we don't think that they're ready to handle certain topics. But the truth is, kids, as Charisma was saying earlier, kids are seeing this already. They're already engaging in it, and they're already starting to have feelings about this. So it's important for us as the adults who love them in their lives, as their parents, as their teachers, as their caregivers, to be in conversation with them, to understand where they're coming from, what they're interpreting about the world, and how we can help them to better develop and form their ideas. So that's what our conversation is going to be about today. And again, thank you so much for joining us for this second part of this conversation that is not only important in the larger sense, but so important in the current state of our country. Having said that, I'd like to actually go ahead and dive right in. We have a lot of great people joining us again. We have Michelle Bailey, Lucero Saldana, Dr. Dusty Hixenbaugh, and Dr. Andre Houghton. For all of them, they are now joined with young people from ages as young as 5, I believe, all the way up to 17. So that we can today hear a range of topics and interests. So today we're going to be speaking with, sorry, my dogs are going crazy. Today we're going to be speaking with Jaden, with Sammy, with Frida, and with James. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first conversation between Dusty and Jaden.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks to the Scarritt Bennett Center. My name is Dustin Hixenbaugh, and I'm a professor of English at San Jacinto College. We serve the southeast area of Houston. And I'm joined today by my son. I've got 2 sons, one 8, one 2. Which one are you?
I'm the one that's 2.
Oh, okay. I'm joined by my 2-year-old, Jaden. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? What grade are you in?
I am in 2nd grade.
Okay, what do you think about 2nd grade?
It's nice, but ever since I started it, I realized that you get a lot more work.
It probably just keeps feeling like that the next grade you get to.
Yeah.
What are your interests? What things do you do when you're not doing your classes?
Video games, TV, playing on like equipment on like a playground, or sleeping.
Sleeping's a good one. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So like we just were listening, this is a conversation about race
Mm-hmm.
and racism
Mm-hmm.
and what kids think about all that.
Mm-hmm.
Because as adults, we don't always listen to children, or don't always realize how much that you all can tell us about how we should know things and what we should do. So we're all really interested to see what you have to say. So can I ask you the hard question first? What is race?
It is that's hard. I feel like race is someone who has a different skin color, like me or you,
Mm-hmm.
or anyone that's joining on this call. That's what I really think racism is.
So skin color. Well, okay, so race is skin color?
And culture.
Okay, can you say more about that?
Culture like the Chinese culture, or the Mexican culture, or any cultures like that.
Okay, so when we talk about race, we're talking about skin color, we're talking about culture. You were naming some countries, maybe, where people might come from.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you learn all this?
Well, throughout the years I've been alive, and in my bedroom, because we have a really tight space through this door and my door, so I can hear a lot of what he is saying.
So you hear what I say about race, and then that teaches you? We're doing virtual learning, both of us, and so Jaden does get to hear a lot about, or just overhear what I'm teaching in my classes at college on Mexican American humanities and things like that. Do you ever have, I mean, do you notice different races at your school?
Yeah.
Yeah, back when you were at school?
I have a best friend who is race.
Well, who's a different race, right? We all have a race. So, what's my race?
White.
Okay, what's yours?
Brownish.
Brownish? Well, that's skin color, right? That's a tricky question because when you ask me what my race is, I would say white. I think you might say, and you have lots of room to decide this when you're older. You might say that you're Mexican American because people who helped make you were Mexican or came from or had family members who had come from Mexico. You might call yourself Latino or Latinx. But okay, you're talking about school. So what other races do you see?
Well, like I was saying, I have a best friend who is black. And
what's his name?
His name is Jeremiah. And we get along. We never really let the fact that we are both race get in the way of our friendship. I feel like no one should.
Why do you feel that way?
Well, I just don't. Maybe it's just me, but I don't think it's right to judge somebody by their skin color, and it's just not right.
Why isn't it right?
It would hurt somebody's feelings. It would, like, let's say one person did it, and they would learn from that and do it to another person, and then another person, corrupting it to be the entire world that does it.
Yeah. So you have to stop yourself, right? Yeah. I keep interrupting your story though.
Yeah, you do.
So can we talk more about your school? Do your teachers ever talk about race or racism?
No.
No? Do you ever read in your classes any books with characters who look like you or your friend?
Yeah.
Yeah? Can you tell us about any of them?
Well, this is history and not really books, but we digged into Indians.
Okay. What did you learn about Native Americans?
Well, how Columbus found where they lived, and how they made peace and helped each other. And I feel like that should be an everyday thing where you should find somebody to be a friend with that is race.
And different race than you.
Yes. And help them. Like help them understand what race is.
So did Columbus help Native Americans?
Well, people he brought with him did.
What did they do?
Well, they shared some of their rations. And so they could share more foods.
I feel like that's a story that we hear a lot, like Columbus coming to the Americas, or like the Pilgrims coming, and like we were just looking recently at a book for Thanksgiving, right? And we have got that holiday coming up. That's the story that we're told is that's when the white people from Europe and the native or indigenous people from this area like had some peace and ate together, right? The story's more complicated than that though, right? I mean, because Columbus came, a lot of people died, people who lived here, right? We've talked a bit about that before, right?
I think.
Yeah. So what do you want from your teachers when it comes to race?
We don't talk about it usually.
Why not?
I don't know.
I mean, it's not because it's not important, right?
No,
it is important. So why do you think teachers don't talk about it?
Maybe they don't want to dig into that because maybe they're scared.
Maybe they're scared. Yeah. Why would they be scared?
Well, maybe they're on another side, a different point of view, looking at race.
So they might actually think that it's okay to treat people differently because they're a different race. But if a teacher were to talk to you about race and racism, then you'd know that they believe people should work together across.
I think so.
Maybe? That's a really interesting thought. Like I, as a white person and a teacher, sometimes avoid talking about race. And what you're telling me is that when I avoid it,
I have another one.
Yeah.
Maybe it reflects on the children's point of view.
How do you mean?
Well, I think you were gonna say about that you don't want to get it. Sometimes you don't want to do that because of the other points of views that could reflect more terribly.
Is there anything else you want to share with the people watching us today?
No.
No? So we're going to have some other people are going to share with us their stories. And at the end, if you have any questions, you'll have the chance to ask them. Or people might ask you some questions too. Cool. Thank you, Jaden.
Go.
No, you stay here.
Can I have my gum?
Thank you so much to both Dr. Dustin and Jaden. Really appreciate you taking some time and sharing that conversation. Again, just want to remind everybody who's watching, please remember to interact with us. We want to hear from you. So drop your comments, ask any questions that you have, and we'll make sure that we can work those in. Having said that, we're going to go ahead and keep moving to these more of these great conversations. I'm going to ask for Dr. Andre Houghton and Sammy to go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to go ahead and give a big shout out to Dr. Dustin and Jaden. Thank you so much. Sammy's 5 years old, and so it was very helpful for us to listen to your conversation first to frame a lot of our conversation. Good morning to everyone looking. I'm Dr. Andre Houghton. I'm a middle school principal in Oakland, California, and I'm joined today by my amazing daughter. Sammy, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, wave, and tell everybody your name?
My name
Be a little louder.
Sammy.
Be a little bit louder. Speak into the camera, baby. What's your name?
Sammy.
Okay, and how old are you?
5.
Can you put up 5 fingers so everybody can see and hear? Okay, what grade are you in, Sammy?
Kindergarten.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So Sammy and I were talking a little bit earlier. Sammy, something that is interesting, me, your mom, and you, we look different. What color am I?
Yeah. Black.
Can you speak a little bit louder? What color is daddy?
Black and brown.
Awesome, awesome. And then what color is mommy?
A bit brown.
Are there other people who look different that you see when we're walking around living our life? Are there any other colors that you might notice? No? You mentioned another color earlier. Is there another color that you sometimes see when we're walking around? A color that starts with a W, maybe?
No.
Think about some of the dolls we see when we go to the toy store a lot.
Some of them are white.
Can you say a little bit louder so people can hear you?
Some of them are white dolls.
Okay. So you do see white dolls. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So something that I thought was interesting, Sammy, is earlier when we were speaking, I asked you if it's okay to talk about people's colors, and you told me something. Do you think it's okay to talk about people's colors? Why? Why not?
Because it's bad.
So colors are a bad word. Why? Why do you think colors are a bad word? You can speak into the camera. So y'all, this is something that I found very interesting when Sammy and I were preparing for the conversation a couple days ago. She was hesitant and she believed that the word color was bad. I think this is something that we all need to be mindful of, right? So like, I'm a Black educator. Her mom is a Latina educator, and she goes to a predominantly Black and brown school. And yet she has still internalized, both from our campuses and our wider world, this idea that maybe color is bad, right? So potentially we're not having these conversations enough. Do you all talk about race or color in class? You don't talk about race or color in class? Oh, so you do sometimes talk about color? What type of color do you all talk about in class? You talk about race. What are some things that you all have talked about race in class?
I don't really know. Only on Fridays we do it.
Oh, on Fridays. You all do, is that when you have your circles?
No, they always just share their screen and then they just tell us all the words on the screen.
Oh, now you all learned a vocabulary word a couple weeks ago. There was a word that you learned. Do you remember that word? When you learned protest. Do you remember when y'all talked about the word protest?
Uh-huh.
Can you maybe tell everybody what you learned about protest?
Yeah.
What was about protest?
When people show up little cardboard words and then they put it up in the air.
Oh, so people sometimes have signs in the air? Okay, why are they walking around with their signs?
Because they're telling something that's not fair.
Oh, so they're mad about something not being fair. Can you think of anything that you've seen that maybe is unfair?
Mm.
Okay.
No.
So something else that I think is interesting, Sammy, you know, your mom and I are not the same color. Do you think that's weird? Why do you think that's weird? When we go out, do you ever think people are looking at us?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Why do you think people sometimes might look at us?
Because you and me are not the same skin color.
Oh, me and mommy are not the same skin color. Okay, interesting. Okay, interesting. Does that make you ever feel different about your color? How do you feel about your color? Do you like your color? Why do you like your color?
Because my other favorite color is brown.
Oh, your favorite color is brown. Okay. Well, another cool conversation I'd love the audience to hear, Sammy. A little bit earlier, we were talking about some of the dolls that you play with. When you think about your dolls, what color are some of your dolls?
My LOL dolls are only two of my LOL dolls are white, and then one is just a bit brown.
Okay, so you have two white dolls, a brown doll. Do you think those doll colors matter? Do they matter to you? Do you like one color or one doll more than the other?
My favorite doll was the little one that had the straight hair, and the other one that was the mom.
Oh, so you mentioned the doll that has straight hair. Do you have straight hair?
Not every time.
Not every time. But do you prefer your hair curly or straight?
Both of them.
You like both of them. Okay, let me ask you another question, Sammy. When you think about TV shows and the kids that you see on TV, do you think they like the white doll or the black doll or the brown doll more?
I don't know.
Okay.
Because whenever I see them, I really, really, really think that they don't even tell if they. Only whenever I watched Ryan, he had like this step 2 kitchen, and then he gave it a 5 because he really liked it.
Oh, so when you're watching Ryan, do you notice anything about Ryan and his family? Are they a different color?
Only Ryan.
So Ryan looks a little different than his parents?
Uh-huh.
Okay, interesting.
And his little sisters and Kate.
I have another question for you, Sammy. Some of your TV shows, do you see people of different colors on your TV shows that you watch?
I only see that Jurassic Park one.
The main character, the young boy who was the hero, what color was he?
Which one?
The one that saved everybody from the dinosaurs. He kind of looked like me. Do you remember what color he was?
He was a bit orange.
So he was brown. We would call that black. Okay. Let me ask you another question. When we talk a couple of weeks ago, Sammy, you know, there was protests outside of our apartment complex, and we went to go get dinner at Popeyes, and we saw some of the police officers. And I noticed that first you wanted to go say hi, but then you kind of backed up and you were nervous. Did you want to say hello to the police officers?
Yes.
Okay, so you did, but you were a little bit nervous or scared. Why were you nervous or scared?
Because I was nervous if they thought that you and mommy was a bad guy.
So you were scared that they might think me and your mom were bad people. Have you seen anything on TV that made you nervous or afraid of the police?
No.
Awesome. Well, Sammy, thank you so much. I know you're only 5 years old, but we're having these conversations. Parents, I know you might not have always been able to hear, but I appreciate you listening. And we can go ahead and yield a few more minutes of our time back to the group.
Thank you so much, Sammy. I really appreciated hearing from you. I also appreciated you, Dr. Houghton. Thank you so much for that excellent modeling of what it's like to have conversations with kids who are even just 5 years old. Again, we have to get out of this mindset that kids are too young or they don't experience the world or they don't understand, right? We have to give them the opportunities and start having these conversations. So again, thank you to Andre, thank you to Dusty, thank you to Jaden, thank you to Sammy. We're gonna keep on with these conversations, and next I'd like to introduce and invite Lucero and Frida. Lucero and Frida, please take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucero Saldaña and I am a family community engagement specialist at Bonham Academy, and I'm also a professor of Mexican American Studies and Humanities at San Antonio College. And this is Frida. Frida, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Frida Renovato. I'm 11 years old. I'm in 6th grade and I go to Bonham Academy. And Lucero is my kind of like a family friend, and like she's the one that invited me here, I was really excited.
Awesome. Frida, we're going to start with how do you feel about the election? What did you hear yesterday? What was your thoughts, your emotions concerning that?
Well, I was kind of scared that Trump was going to win because I didn't want that to happen again for another 4 years. And something that offended me was my mom showed me this, that when they were like talking about Native Americans on the board, they put something else, and I'm Native American myself, which really hurt me. I didn't know about this because I was watching the news at school and I wasn't watching on TV, but my mom was the one that showed me about that.
So you talk about like how our current president, Trump, has said, things about other groups, right?
Yes.
Other minority groups. What other things have you heard that made you feel like you did not want to support Trump, even though you can't vote right now, but you're a child, so who would you like to be president?
I would like Biden because he supports every community, especially the LGBTQ. And I don't know if I'm part of it or just like an ally. I'm still finding myself. And I'm used to like people like criticizing the LGBTQ, but I have lots of friends that are part of it, and he doesn't, and Biden does. Like what he said, he doesn't support same sexuality marriages. It didn't really hurt me because I don't know if I am or I'm not, but that's probably a reason why I wouldn't vote for him if I was 18 or older.
Thank you for being super honest about that. I know gender identity is something that sometimes we don't discuss with our children, right? Especially with our students as educators, but it's extremely important to, also have that space for our children. Another question I have for you, Frida, is have you experienced any racism or maybe discrimination? Maybe it could be language discrimination, like within your lifetime?
Not well once, but I was very little, so I didn't remember this. But my mom was the one that told me about it. She told me that whenever I tried to go play with some kids, their parents would pull me away, pull them away, because they didn't want me to touch them. Like I wasn't a very like violent baby. I was like more like a calm baby. And there was this one time, I don't remember what age I was, but I still remember I went to Wisconsin with my tia, my prima, and my mom, and we were going to a powwow. They automatically saw me as Native and not as a Mexican. It wasn't really like offensive because I am Native, but like still.
And this is a great way of you explaining that even within like, we see a lot of like white and Black differences, but even within like Native American differences and then a Mexican differences, skin color, cultures, there's still differences there, and sometimes that can hurt, right? Another question I have for you, since I do know you're involved with Mexican American Studies, how has Mexican American Studies helped you learn about your history and about, racism in total and discrimination?
Well, it really helped me both learning my culture, especially like even if I wasn't in the mosque, I would go to meetings with my mom and like be right next to her. So Miss Lisa, you would see me almost in every meeting. Like if we were going to the UTSA or the other place that was like red. And I technically grew up with learning about culture and about racism, and that is sometimes people's lives are at risk almost every day. And I want to become a lawyer to stop that. And that's why I like being in this group or being in the mosque. I'm not just in the mosque program. Also in a Mexican American study class. And Miss Manriquez, my teacher, talks about everything, not just Mexicans or Africans. She talks about Native Americans too, which not a lot of people talk about. And Mr. Salas, he talks about how people are moving from their state because it's either racism or like they're being threatened, something like that. He talks about that too. That's why social studies is my favorite subject. And yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. At Bonham, we definitely have really awesome teachers that are teaching we're teaching a different curriculum, right? We're teaching about different perspectives and not just a whitewash curriculum. Frida did say that she is involved with our organization. She does come to some Mosque meetings. Her and her sisters have been involved for a couple years. And even though I guess they probably don't feel like official members, they kind of are. They're familia. They always come and they're always so excited to come to our meetings. And that's how we involved our young ones, right? Even if they're just listening or coloring, sometimes they do overhear these conversations, as you could tell by the way Frida is speaking about her experiences. Frida, what are other ways that you have denounced racism? Like, what have you done within the community? Because you talked about, coming to our meetings, but what else have you done within the San Antonio community?
Well, I've been to other places like there's this person named Miss Kelly. She talks about Mexican Americans things, and we learn how sometimes to dance blocorico. Not just the girls, but the boys too. And we've been to marches like the Cesar Chavez, the Trump woman march, and I've been to a bunch of powwows. Like powwows are traditional, and so that really helped. And sometimes, my mom and my dad listen to a lot of Mexican music, and when I was little, I didn't really like when my dad put Mexican music on the radio, but now I'm used to it since I know more about the culture and what to focus on what the lyrics of the Mexican music is saying to see if I understand the music. Not like I understand English music and what the meaning of the songs are. So I should pay attention more to that. And
I'll also like to add in that Frida is actually part of our new Conjunto program at Bonham. So
Yeah.
she is playing the button accordion, and what I heard, she's doing a fantastic job at it. I know she's beating me. I haven't even practiced in a few weeks just because I've been so busy, but she's going to be my teacher one day. Frida, any other last comments that you would like to add on? I know you were super excited to join our conversation.
Yes.
And you had maybe like a couple things written.
Yeah. My parents do talk about this a lot, especially my mom. She's the one that preached me about this at a young age. But I was taken away from Spanish, like to learn how to talk more Spanish, because I do know how to talk Spanish, but I don't know how to talk it like my sisters, because I was like separated from Spanish class. But now I'm back and I'm kind of better than I was. And I was scared when Donald Trump was declared president. When I was in second grade when this happened, I was scared for my cousins and my dad because I didn't want them to be deported back. And when my dad got his citizenship, he was really happy. And I went to go with my dad to see him like vote. And when he came back to the car with his sticker, he was excited. Like there was a big grin on his face, which made me really happy too. And I've been to one march that I didn't say was the one to bringing back families together. And I saw one of my friends there, and I was really happy that she was there too. And people were really nice over there. It wasn't just Mexicans or like Africans or natives. There was some white people there too.
Thank you so much, Frida. And I just want to clarify that the march she was talking about was actually the immigration march, right? The one where kids were caged in here, and she was one of the students that went with her mom and her family to go ahead and support others for us not to have our immigrants being caged in. Thank you so much, Frida, for joining us, and thank you so much for everyone here on this panel for also being in the space. It's great, awesome space. I'll go ahead and pass it to Justin.
Thank you again, Lucero and Frida. I appreciate you so much. That was an incredible conversation. These conversations have been truly inspiring, and it makes me sad that we're heading into our last one here, but I want to just keep this moving. So I'm going to now introduce Michelle Bailey and James Jean-Marie. Please go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Well, as Jay said, my name is Michelle Bailey. I'm a former special education teacher in SAISD. I now work in the financial industry. But I'll turn it over to my partner, James. If you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Jean-Marie. I'm a senior in high school. I'm 17 years old. Some of my passions include photography, graphic design, and spending time with my friends.
Awesome. So I kind of want to start with a pretty big question here. I'm particularly interested in what lessons have you been taught from your mom, from your dad, from people in your family to keep yourself safe in the world as you were growing up?
Yeah, so for me, my dad, he's always raised us. Like I have 2 other brothers. He's always been telling us about you're a Black man in America. You're always gonna get the short end of the stick no matter what happens. But he's always told us whenever you're interacting with the police, make sure that you're respectful. If you're ever pulled over by the police, have your hands out the window, reach for your papers and stuff slowly. Just be respectful the entire time. If you're in a friend group and I'm usually the only Black one in that friend group, if something bad happens, I'm gonna get blamed for it. Just happens. So just things like that. Another example would be to just always keep an eye out for whatever is going on and be respectful. in any situation. And yeah, just things like that to be aware of in like whatever situation you're in.
Absolutely. And being that you are a Black male, what has been your reaction to seeing acts of police violence around the country and even in your own city with, Black men, but also Black women?
I would say like it's not surprising, but it's also like not again situation, like especially with this year. But I don't know, it's just really like messed up because like I know for me, like I could be the next person or my friend could be, and or my father or my brothers, and like it'd be really disheartening to see them on the news as like the next hashtag or something like that.
Yeah, and do you and your family have conversations about that? Whenever you do see yet another person on TV, yet another hashtag, what are those conversations like?
I would say like again, like my dad always tells like you're a Black man in America. It's not going to be an easy life for you or like easy for anyone, but especially for Black men, Black women. But like you just have to keep living life. You can't like be in fear of yourself every day.
Mhm.
Try to like make the best of what you have.
Absolutely. One thing you mentioned a little earlier was that you were you're like the only Black man in your friend group. Do you often talk about race with those friends at all?
I would say like not usually, but like I know like on social media I see like they're supportive of like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, and like I appreciate them making like a post in their story and just things like that in general. But I know like they'd be like supportive of me and like everything that I do, and like I appreciate all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really interested in this idea of talking about microaggressions just based on your age and all of that. And for the audience, I just want to kind of go over what is a microaggression. So it's essentially an indirect, subtle, or unintentional act of discrimination against members of a marginalized group. So the question for you, James, is do you have an example of a microaggression in your life that has happened to either you or someone in your family that you'd like to share with us?
I think of two, like for my mom, whenever she works at a bank, and I remember one time she told us like this lady came in and she's like, I want to talk to your manager after having like this argument with someone else. And like it was her and my mom talking, and she said, I am the manager. And she was like, oh, she was like surprised by that. And then another thing, like for me personally, it's happened like 2 times in my high school. I know like I'm sitting in class and like my teacher calls on someone else like by a different name. Like there's like another Black male when it was supposed to be like my name or something like that. And just kind of like small things like that like impacted me.
What is your reaction to that? Does it feel just like another day? Like do you harbor any feelings about that? Like what is your reaction to those, I guess, experiences?
I'd say like I try like not to make a big deal out of it. But, like it's also like not every like Black person looks the exact same thing, and like it shouldn't be like a problem, but like it is anyway.
And I'm really intrigued because I'm interested if you've ever mentioned that to your teachers before, or if they've even caught themselves with the mix up of people. Has that ever occurred? Has it ever happened?
I mean, they just like apologize and say like, "Oh, I'm sorry, James," or whatever, and like not make it a whole big deal. But yeah.
And in school, is there conversations around race or racism in any of your classes at any point in time? And if so, what's your experience like in those cases?
I'd say like especially with this year and all that's happened with like police brutality and stuff like that. And like my online classes, my teachers have been making a point to like acknowledge that like something's wrong in our country and having like little discussions here and there or like what about like what's happening in our city and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And are those discussions, typically pretty active? Are they more surface level? Talk to me a little bit about that.
I would say like some of them are surface level, some go into a little bit more. My journalism teachers, I remember like we had like a class discussion where they presented how does like the media portray the Black man and like how they have like a thuggish photo of them compared to like a white person where it's always like a nice portrait or something like that. But yeah, they went in a lot of depth with that in our class and I appreciated that a lot. And then like my math teacher, she like acknowledged that there's stuff going on in this country and like if we need like a breather from like homework and just things like that, she's always there to talk about whatever, but like really supportive.
Absolutely. Of the teachers that you have, or are there any teachers in your school that are Black? Or what is your faculty makeup? I mean, you probably don't know like exact percentages, but is it mostly white, some Black, mostly Black, some white? What does that look like for you?
It's mostly white, and then like I think I had one Black teacher. He was my math teacher at a freshman year.
Is that your only Black teacher you've ever had?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that as being interesting or kind of an anomaly, or have you ever thought about that at all? Wow, I've only had one Black teacher in my life.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like a weird thing because like it'd be cool to see like more representation, but like it also has to do with like getting like Black people interested in like the education system and like wanting to show representation like throughout.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, James, I really appreciate, all of your responses, but I don't know if you, I want to give you sort of a little bit of the floor. Do you have any questions for me that I can ask or that I can answer, that I can ask for you before we turn it back over to Jay?
Yeah. One of my questions would be like, how has this election affected you in like in any way, shape or form?
Yeah. I think, seeing the rhetoric of Donald Trump has been really, I think, harmful, for me because I'm Mexican and Black. I'm Black and Mexican, and having him talk about immigrants typically that are of Mexican descent is really bothersome because, right, to just claim whole groups of people are criminals, or all of these crazy things. But then also when I see, Black people being gunned down at an alarming rate and, protests happening, but then there's good people on both sides, right? Like that rhetoric has really been, I think, really damaging, but I am completely excited to see our first, biracial woman become vice president. And I'm just excited to see what happens next. I think we have a lot of healing to do. I think it's going to take a lot of time. But I can't say that I'm not happy about what occurred yesterday. So yeah. Well, all right. Well, I appreciate you, James. Jay, we'll turn it right back over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle and James. I just want to again say thank you to all of our panelists today and all of the young people who've joined us. It is incredibly brave for you to step out of your comfort and to experience this with us today. Additionally, it also should remind everybody that's listening and watching today that this is the type of conversations that we can be having, that this is the way that we can interact with our kids, and that they are ready, and that there are ways to do this that don't devolve, right? That don't become a challenge. I hope that we provided some really great insights today for you and how you can support the students and the children in your life as you broach these issues and bring them into the conversation as co-conspirators in the fight for racial justice. Having said that, I'm going to ask for Sharisa to come back in and turn it back over to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. What great conversation. And I wanted to bring us all back together so that we might be in conversation with each other. And so I want to start with Andre, particularly with your 5-year-old daughter. Would you share, as a parent, from a parent's perspective, what is it like, particularly when she said the word color, right, is kind of bad, right? So would you talk a little bit of how the comfort level as a parent talking to your 5-year-old child about these very complex issues, and even hearing how she has internalized, right, some of these complex issues. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. I think a couple things that I'm thinking, right? So her mom and I like to believe we're further along in our journey in terms of our willingness to discuss these issues, right? Like I mentioned, we live in Oakland. She goes to a predominantly Black and brown school. Her teachers have traditionally been Black or brown. And we live in a world in 2020 where she's getting more representation of color on TV. And yet and still, with all of that, with parents that I think are a little bit more inclined to be discussing these issues, she is still internalized a lot of these views around like which color group is better, or the idea that like we're not supposed to mention color, right? And it makes me think about the smog of racial issues that like we just really can't escape. And I think so many of us are hesitant to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is when we don't, they're just getting the wrong ideas, because clearly she has some thoughts about this. So this is like a push to me that like I got to do better, y'all.
We all have to do better. We all have to do better. Jaden and Dustin, how often do you all talk about race and racism, diversity in your household?
Sorry, we're spitting out some gum. Do you have an answer to that question? How often do you think we talk about race and racism?
I don't think we do it much. Not really that much.
And that's funny because kind of like Andre, you know, I like to think that we talk about it a lot. And we could do more. Yeah. Is there anything, you know, like a particular time that you feel like we should have talked about it?
Well, when somebody gets gunned down, I feel like we should talk about that.
Okay, and I think that came up when we were listening to James talk a bit. I mean, Jaden was asking like, what's a hashtag? You know, and you know, so talking through some of that while our microphone was off. I hope while it was off. You know, we were even having some of that conversation right now. So just participating here is, you know, illuminated for me some spots that we could cover better. I was going to say though, I feel like, I mean, my perception, you told me I talked too much about the president during the election. Yeah. Do you feel like race came up there?
No.
Really?
No.
Okay.
Do you want it to come
up? That's not the answer that I was hoping that you give me, but that's okay. That's your real answer, right?
Yeah.
So.
Lucera and Frida, what I love about your interaction and even your relationship is the work that Frida is doing out in the community, right? And the way in which she's so involved in the work. So would the both of you, beginning with you, Lucira, talk about why is it important for adults to bring in children to participate in works in the community that does the work of racial justice? And either one of you can talk, but let's start with you, Lucero, your experience with working with young people in the community and why that's important in terms of raising co-conspirators.
Yeah, for me, I've always thought that our students should be the ones leading this, right? I think the adults should definitely be the ones who, teach them how to do these things and show them the skills, but they're the leaders, they're the ones who have the most powerful voices. And for Frida, and obviously her mom's involved as well with Somos Mas, and we've worked together for a couple of years with Frida and her sisters. They're just engaged and they want to do this stuff. It's funny because at times her mom will tell me whenever we see each other, and she'll say, the girls are asking when the next meeting is, and we don't even have our next meeting until like 2 months from now, because they're that engaged. They really want to be there. And like I said, sometimes it's really boring adult stuff. There's a lot of talking going on, but they thoroughly enjoy it because they overhear these conversations that are really crucial. Mm-hmm. And then the beautiful part is that they go and tell their friends who are not a part of this organization, right? Who are not a part of Mexican American Studies. And that's when they get more engagement. They were like, hey, I want to join that. Or, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And it just starts this beautiful community of not just adults, but also children. And it's really great to see like Somos Mas and the Mas community just be, overall students all the way to, grandparents at times.
Yeah, when I was in 4th grade, I asked my mom if I can join the MAS program at this other school I went to before I went to Bonham. She said, no, these are for the kids that don't experience what you experience. And I was a bit sad, but I was like, yeah, they deserve to experience what I get to see almost every day.
Yeah, awesome. James and Miss Bailey, particularly James, you talked about how, you're often the only Black person in terms of your friend group, and you barely have very few, if any, white Black teachers. Where do you find joy about being a Black boy? Like, share with us the joy, right? So you talked about how your parents have talked about the warnings, right? But tell us where you find joy about being a Black boy.
I would say like it's definitely like an experience, but like I wouldn't change it for anything else. I kind of like get to like make my own story. I get to see like how I like build myself up in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like happy that I am who I am and like the color of my skin and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I love that, James. Telling your own story or writing your own story is a form of protest. Mm-hmm. That is very much a form of protest. And so there are many different ways to protest, and writing your own story as a Black boy is very much protest. Yeah, so I'd like to talk to the adults, beginning with you, Justin, and Ms. Bailey. We've seen even in this conversation, right, how children can surprise us with how they're processing information, right? And so would you share why in these conversations that it is just as important to listen and not react, right? And also not necessarily be quick to correct. But why in these conversations with young people, why is it important, just as important to listen and to be receptive to questions and even feedback from young people?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. And I think, especially as adults, it can be so hard to listen. Honestly, sometimes we don't listen to each other, right? And so, really making sure that we're working on that active listening skill, making sure that we're asking follow-up questions and focusing on the fact that this is an opportunity for us to learn about how our kids are interpreting the world, right? As a teacher, and I teach high school, we've been talking a lot about this election. My students have been working on election projects, creating videos and different advertisements and ways to promote, voter engagement. And throughout those conversations, we talk about things like redistricting, and how redistricting has turned into gerrymandering, where we have these districts that don't necessarily represent the people that they're supposed to, so that certain office holders, certain congressional members can stay in those places. So those are some of the conversations that we start to have, and then you hear back from the students and you listen to them about how they're interpreting that. The idea that the coronavirus and could actually be a hoax, or it could be overblown, is something that I've heard from my students before. And rather than reacting to that and being upset and wanting to be like, no, like you got to do the right thing, you got to protect yourself. I remind myself that my job is to facilitate. My job is not to judge. My job is not there to pretend or to act as if I have the answers for them. My job is to listen and to help them to process and to understand how the world works through their lens, and then ask follow-up questions. I really think that follow-up of, why do you think this? Where did you hear this idea? Is really important.
Yeah.
And I would also add two things. So first, I genuinely believe that children are little truth serums. So if you listen enough and don't respond, you have a really accurate view of what's actually happening, right? And so, what I mean by that is, I'm particularly struck by, Dusty and Jaden's conversation, where he was like, hey, do you think we talk about, race a lot? And Jaden's like, nope. Right. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's not to say they never talk about it, because clearly they do. But right, we can see or ask the question, well, what does even a lot mean to you? Is it every other week? Is it every day? Is it every other month? And then really get to ascertain, well, what is he understanding about this word? What is, Dusty understanding about this word? And where can we fall in between that? And I think that's really important. And the second thing I wanted to add was, I think that we live in a society where we have a bunch of adults who have been told what to think instead of how to process what it is we're being told. And so I want to be the person who allows a child to discover on their own what the truth may be, using by teaching them, how do you find sources that are reliable? What do you look for when you're looking for misinformation? And I think if more adults could do that themselves, I think we wouldn't be in a world filled with misinformation that people are just regurgitating.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are my two things.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Could you say a little bit more in terms of why it's important for us to normalize language, words like racism, race, difference, diversity in the classroom and also in the home? Why is it important for us to use the language without fear, right? Without hesitation, so that our children can embrace those words, particularly in conversations like this? Anyone can answer.
So the first thought that comes to my mind is, I navigate the world as a Black and Mexican woman. I've got big poofy hair, and I still end up in spaces where people feel uncomfortable talking to me about things that they want to know. And I find that really harmful, because who do you feel comfortable then talking to about people like me? And doesn't this then create more of a problem, right? Because then you start to assume things about me that are not true, and you could have heard it from the source. And so I think that if we normalize in the same way that Sammy thinks that color, mentioning a color is bad, right? Calling me Black is not bad. I want you to call me Black all day, Mexican, Blexican, I don't care what use, but celebrate me, because I am ridiculously proud to be in the body that I'm in.
Yeah.
So I want other people to know that, but also ask me the tough questions, because I would rather you hear it from me than hear it from someone else who's going to teach you something awful or something offensive than to me.
That's right. Yeah.
And can I jump in on that too? Michelle, you bringing up this idea of like just ask, just really means so much to me. And I just kind of want to share this interaction that I had with a friend a few weeks ago, when my friend is white and Jewish, and we were just like taking a walk and talking, and he was talking about the ways in which he like interacts with people, and he's very extroverted, loves to interact with people, so on and so forth. But he had mentioned how some older white people in his circle get really upset when Black people don't respond, or people of color don't respond to like a high wave, when they're like walking down the street or something like that. And, his interpretation of that situation was, or their interpretation was that, that they're shifty or shady, or that they're, is something that they're hiding. And I was kind of like, talking to him from my situation of being like, well, honestly, truly, when I walk through the world and I see white people, I see them as something to fear, as a Black man. So since I see white people as something to fear, your friendly wave doesn't interpret the same way as a friendly wave to me. To me, I kind of want to be ignored, because my experience has taught me that having these interactions with white people that I don't know could lead to my death, right? And so this idea that like there are assumptions being made about the fact that I'm walking down the street with my head down, with my hat low, trying not to make eye contact, despite the fact that I'm doing that for my safety, and yet the interpretation from a white gaze is that there's something wrong. But how do you actually just have that conversation, or like you said, if you actually talked to a Black person, then you might get an understanding of the fear that I experience and why I might not want to engage.
I also want to mention the importance of perspective within a community of color, right? A community color perspective is different from a white perspective. And I think that we need to engage in these conversations. And it's totally different from white perspective, an Indigenous perspective, a Black perspective, and a brown perspective for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the double consciousness, right? People of color always are aware of how we see ourselves, but we're also navigating how white people, the white gaze, how white people see Black people, right? And unfortunately, white people don't have that privilege of the double consciousness, right? So they walk in with the kind of white privilege in terms of how they enter into relationship with people of color, assuming with the assumptions, right? And very unaware of how we see ourselves, right? But also how they see us. And so, like you said, when I first moved to the South, Justin, folks waving, and it's like, we don't do that in Jersey. You don't wave to a stranger, right? That Southern hospitality. But for Black folks, it comes with suspicion, right? Because again, to be seen through the white gaze is dangerous for people of color. And so it's very important that it's not just people of color who are conscious of the ways in which and how to navigate, right, white spaces. It's important that white people are more conscious and aware of how to be in relationship and how to navigate spaces that are not white, right? So I'm very aware that this panel is full of people of color, right? And so I want to invite you all, young people too, to talk to the white person who's watching, the white family who's watching, in terms of why is it important for white families to be having these conversations too. So we don't have the privilege, James, your father, you talked about your father, my brother, who has consistently told you growing up what it means to be a Black person in spaces and how to behave for the sake of safety, just to get home, right? Black families, white families do not have those conversations with their children, right? People of color consistently have the talk, right? But I would like to suggest here that everyone should be having the talk. The content of the talk might look different, but this idea that it's unpolite to talk about politics and race and religion in public is killing us as a society, right? We need to be having these conversations around the table. We need to be having conversations with our children at all ages and consistently, not one conversation. James, you said earlier, your dad has always had these consistent conversations with you. So I want to invite anyone and everyone to share, why is it important for white families to be having these conversations as well?
Yeah, I would love to hop in on that one. I think a couple things that I'm thinking about, right? So as the victims of this systemic racism that has been going on for centuries, right? For far too long, it was on people of color, victim groups, the oppressed, to sort of provide that educational space. And I think a lot of times, you know, as a kid growing up, and even now as an adult, some of my white friends or friends who, you know, operate in a different line of difference, they've got questions and they come to me because they have no one else to go to. And a lot of times I'll answer those questions, but it can be stressful. So I think, like, first and foremost, white parents need to be willing to have those conversations so that kids aren't necessarily putting that on kids who are dealing with the oppression. I think the other piece here too is, unfortunately, the default is the negative smog that we're breathing in, right? So if your kids are just naturally acclimated to this idea that, like, race is bad, Black people, brown people are bad, and that society views them as such, if white parents don't correct that, then kids are going to walk in with that negative. I think a lot of times white parents have this potential view that, like, things are even, and so they're afraid to talk about race because if they do, maybe they'll mess their kids up. But I actually think it's the opposite. Your kids are coming in with the negative view society has. It's your job to fix that. And if you don't, they're going to think you agree with it.
Yes, yes, yes. Frito, you wanted to say something.
Yes. So I have lots of friends that aren't colored or white, but they still respect other people. Like my friend Odette, or she's one of my best friends. She's not colored, but she respects us. She doesn't say anything bad about us. And she's in the like the Mass Social Studies group. So she's learning about the like Mexican culture and other stuff like that, which, like, everyone at my school at Bonham is, like, really, like, positive. They're not negative. They respect everyone, especially the teachers. They're really nice.
Awesome. James, how often do you talk to your friends, your white friends, about race issues?
I'd say, like, not that often. Like, I did have, like, one of my friends reach out to me, and he, like, wanted to talk about, like, what's going on, like, within our city and, like, around the nation regarding, like, Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. And I think, like, it was, like, a cool experience to, like, tell him, like, not cool, but, like, what it's like to live in America as, like, a Black man, and, like, the different fears that I have compared to him. Like, one of the things I said was, like, you don't have to fear your life whenever, like, a cop car, like, passes by. You can, like, really just do whatever and not be afraid of what happens to you in whatever situation and things like that. But yeah, I've just, like, I haven't had many conversations with a lot of my friends on race, but that one in particular was, like, kind of meaningful.
Yeah. Would anybody else like to add?
I was going to say everything Dr. Andre said was great. Thank you. But the other thing I really wanted to add is I am not the exception. Justin is not the exception, right? Everyone in this panel, we're not the exception. Okay, we are one of many. And I say that because often in the spaces that I'm in, people look at me as though I'm the exception. Oh, well, oh, it's because you're smart. Oh, it's because, you don't fall into, the way that other Black people are. And it's like, I'm happy that now you know who I am, but I'm not the only one. There are 1,000 more Jameses out there. There are 1,000 more Justins. There are millions more Michelles. You just haven't met them yet. And the propaganda that you're seeing makes you believe that we don't exist.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that is the same for, Black experiences, Mexican experiences, Native Americans, right? And I wish that other people could just see all the things that I see in my community, but you will never know unless you have these conversations.
Yeah.
So that's all I have to add.
I'm so glad you said that, Michelle, because and Andre, I think you said this earlier too. Oftentimes, particularly in these conversations, Black people, people of color are given the burden to have to carry the conversation, right? Be the expert in the conversation, but also deal with the triggers of racial injustice. Right. And so I think it's important, particularly in these conversations, that white families are doing their own research. Right. I mean, in 2020, you have access to information like never before. Right. And so this idea that I don't know is not helpful. You don't know because you don't want to know. Information is easy to get access to. Right. And next week, we're doing our third installment of Raising Co-Conspiratorship next week, same time, library edition. And so we'll have librarians that come to share in terms of resources. But here's the point. Information is available to anyone and everyone. And so this idea that I don't know, and so I need to ask a Black person or a person of color is lazy work. And so I want to bring in Dusty and all the educators actually, but I'm starting with you, Dusty, to bring your voice in. Let's go back into the classroom. Can we talk a little bit about why it's important for educators to include, right, a diverse kind of curriculum with their authors and with the books and what they're reading, that their curriculum is diverse so that it's not communicating, right, that there are only white people who are scholars or white people who are educators or intellects, right? Why is it important to diversify your curriculum as a educator in the classroom to push the racial justice agenda, right? In the classroom, Dusty?
There are lots of parts to that question. I think that, when I think about the way people try to diversify their curriculum in the past, ways that I felt that I should diversify my curriculum is to remove one author and replace them with another, or spend 1 week doing something a little bit different. Where I was teaching high school, 9th grade, it was required in my 9th grade course that one unit be a Mexican-American author. And that was inspired, I think, from an admirable goal to have students in the community who are mostly Mexican-American see themselves reflected in the author and the writing. But that's not enough. And, I think so much about, I'm really blanking on her name and want to go look it up real fast. The Nigerian-American writer, Adichie, I think she has this really popular TED talk about the danger of the single story. Part of that, she talks as somebody from a colonized African country. But about how when she came to the United States, people seemed to think that they knew who she was and where she came from because they'd seen a movie set in her country, or read one book with a character who grew up in Africa and got a scholarship and came to the United States, and had like this one vision from magazine covers of what an African town might look like, and and how that was really dangerous for her, right? And felt, maybe dangerous isn't quite the right word, but it was, it caused her harm and doubt, and that maybe the kind of double consciousness that you're talking about, to feel like she had in her head 100 different visions of what it could be like to be a white person, but other people didn't have the same kind of diversity of perspectives about her own person. And so anyway, I guess to your point, the call that I would give to educators is to diversify your curriculum by trying to find viewpoints within communities and to really bring those to the fore. Don't have your Mexican American author, have your 12 Mexican American authors, and encourage students to figure out how intersectional identities create differences within that particular group, and that's a much richer conversation, and helps you see people as individuals who do have race, and that's important, right? But also as individuals who are different because of other aspects of their identity as well. And I just want to acknowledge that, like, as a white person, and the only one on screen at the moment, like, there are some moments even in this conversation where like, I feel kind of uncomfortable, right? Like, is this a place where I should jump in? Like, am I going to have the right words right now, right? Like, one thing that I have seen before that stands out to me is that as a white person, it's easy to like forget about the way that you're racialized in society. In a white society, whereas other people of color, that's constantly present, right? And I think about like that, and how like this is this conversation with my son. Like maybe there are times where like I felt like we talked about race a lot more than he did, because like I had that privilege not to be thinking about race as much as he might. Anyway, all this is to say is I think that the second thing that I would say to educators is feel free to get uncomfortable, and that you can name that and call that out, and that's actually productive. And that just goes to the bigger point a lot of educators make, which is that you should be vulnerable. There are limits to your knowledge. You shouldn't, put forward this vision of yourself as infallible and expert on everything, right? Like, kids have so much knowledge. And if you really want to train them to become leaders, you need to encourage them to share that knowledge, and not, see the teacher as somebody who can never be brought down a peg or something like that. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some of the wayward thoughts going through my mind right now.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in there as well. Dusty, thank you so much for bringing some of that up. I also want to encourage educators, and also just sort of everybody who's working with kids. Start with the kids' interests. And so much of our curriculum could be decolonized by centering the community that we're in, as Dusty mentioned earlier. If we are talking to our students and getting to know our students and letting them drive the seat around what we investigate and what we explore throughout the year, they're much more likely to be able to engage in thoughtful and important ways. The idea that I don't go into the school year already knowing what books I might be teaching for that year, because I need to talk to my kids first and have a discussion about the people that they are. And sometimes there are incredible people within their families that have books or have businesses or have opportunities or community connections that are important and that can be wrapped into that curriculum. So decentralizing this idea of going out to find this white narrative or sticking to this white narrative that education has given us, but to be able to actually say, hey, what is it that you want to know? What is it that you are interested in? And starting the conversation from there. Educators have a lot more freedom in this than I think that we think about. Yes, you may not be at the most progressive school, but again, if you use student voice, if you ignite their action, then you can get students on your side to help you change the curriculum, to help you say, okay, well, this year, maybe my school isn't going for all of this, but I'm going to be able to get these 2 books on the curriculum because I had a groundswell from my students and I listened to them. So going back to that idea of listening, decolonize the curriculum by listening to your students and bringing their stories into the classroom. Have them do the research, have them select the authors, have them select the material that we're covering. And then we do our job as educators to weave in the standards.
I'd also like to add in also just like looking at data that we've had within the community, especially within the educational pipeline, right? How we can motivate our students to change those numbers. And specifically for the Chicano educational pipeline, out of 100 elementary students, only 46 of those students go to high school. And from those 46, only 26 go to college. And from that 26, only 8 graduate with the BA degree. And then it goes up to 2% with the master's degree, and then less than 1% with the doctoral degree. That should give us as educators the motivation to make sure that we have these perspectives in education, because all the other pipelines show that the more you see yourself in curriculum, the better you'll do. We need to add these voices in our education, and it needs to be now.
Awesome. Frida, I saw your hands up.
Yeah, I'm not an educator because I'm young, but I do like talk about it at school with my friends, especially one friend. And there was this one time I was watching, I'm an anime nerd, so I might be talking about this a lot more. There was this one time I was watching my favorite show, My Hero Academia. It's about heroes in training. And I found out that one of the characters were Mexican, and there was another one, a pro hero, that's been as a hero for a very long time. He was a Native American, which got me excited because I found something that didn't just have Korean characters, that it was more than one race, which got me really excited.
Yeah. James.
Last year, my junior year, I took U.S. history, and like my teacher, he was like the best guy ever. But like as Justin was saying, like he like asked us to like drive like the questions that we have and like what we wanted to learn, and like one of the things I remember was like the Tesla race massacre thing, and like he talked like the good and the bad and like Black Wall Street and stuff like that. And like the whole year, I was just like, I never knew about this until now, and it was like a really like informative and like intriguing class to be a part of, and like I was happy to take it. And yeah, it was like the best like history. Like I started like liking history again after taking AP World History last year. It was like a bunch of stuff, but yeah.
James, I'm so glad you said that. I learned of the Tulsa Massacre, Black Wall Street, not in high school, not in college, undergrad, not in grad school, but when I started my doctoral program and we had a trip in Oklahoma, that is when, y'all, I learned about the Tulsa Massacre, right? And so these things, it matters because what's taught in the classroom or what's not taught in the classroom has a direct impact, right, of what your students will know and not know, right? It was not until I started my doctoral program when I learned, so I'm so glad you learned it in junior high, in your junior class in high school, James. One last thing, and then we'll close out this session here. I want to go back to something Dusty said about discomfort, right? I think being uncomfortable is one of the biggest barriers in having conversations about race, particularly for white people. White people don't like to be uncomfortable, right? And so they'll rather avoid it than lean into it. Yet people of color, we live in discomfort all the time. It literally is a norm for us, right? I'm so used to being uncomfortable. I don't know what I would do if I was fully comfortable, right? So I'd like for anyone to share why it's important for us to not avoid conversations that makes us uncomfortable. why it's important for us to lean into discomfort and not allow that to be the barrier of having conversations in the home, right? And in public, to your young people, to anyone around race and racism. We just, this year alone for me, I just feel like 2020, if anything, 2020 has taught us that we can no longer hold on to this idea that we can't talk about religion, politics, and race in public. That concept is just, it's killing us as a society, as a people, as a culture. And one of the biggest barriers having these conversations in public with white people is discomfort. And so would anyone join in terms of why encouraging, why it's important to lean into discomfort, why that should not be the barrier in terms of having these conversations?
So can I just, I'm going to jump in really quickly on this topic, just because this idea of discomfort for me as an educator goes back to learning. We are learning the most when we are pushed outside of our comfort zones, right? When we are pushed or asked to think about or try things that we haven't successfully done in the past. And so because of that, I think it's important for us to think about it as a learning process. Don't limit your learning by being afraid of what might come out of the conversation. Sure, you might get upset. Sure, the person you're talking to might get upset. But at the end of the day, we can all have these conversations in productive ways if we start out with norms, if we start out with agreements at the beginning of conversations to say, hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. I know this might get a little bit messy. I know that we may not even have a resolution by the time that we're done in this conversation, but I want to at least start the conversation. So let's talk about how we're going to engage with each other. Yeah. In my family, it's okay to yell and get loud and get boisterous. But what we're not going to do is call each other out our names, or we're not going to disrespect each other. We are going to make sure that we focus on telling our stories and not, pretending that we know the stories of other people. So think about some of those agreements. Don't be afraid of the discomfort. Lean into that discomfort, but make sure that you are thinking about the agreements and the norms that you can make with the people that you're having conversations with.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. In our work, racial justice, we call that rules of engagement. You cannot have these complex conversations without starting with what are the rules of engagement, right? In conversation. That's what keeps, right? The conversation sacred. That's what keeps and also safeguard the relationships, these rules of engagement. Thank you, Justin, for saying that. Others?
I just think that growth, this is the educational point that James made, that growth isn't possible if you don't confront what's not comfortable. And I think that another way to frame that would be as short-term versus long-term. And I say this having made this decision in the past. I see somebody or I interact with somebody who says something that or acts in a way that I think is potentially racist. And I choose not to address that in the short term and let that go. Don't make either of us comfortable. But then what's the long-term impact of that? My short-term comfort is bought by a long-term continuation of racism. And, I don't know that it's this simple, but I'd rather pay right now with a little bit of discomfort for a future for my children and y'all's children and everybody, that people like in that future, that discomfort isn't as necessary. There's less to be uncomfortable about.
Mm-hmm. Others?
I think our world has lived in this constant comfort to our detriment. And what I mean by that is we don't want to, ruffle anyone's feathers. So we don't talk about some of the blatant issues, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, even though this person represents harmful things to my community, I can still, hug and love this person. And it's like, okay, I hear that, but is that the comfortable route to go? Because the uncomfortable route is, I really struggle with being able to maintain our friendship you exercising your rights then invalidates my humanity.
Mm.
Right. And so like I think I'm always seeing all this like love and peace and harmony, and it's just like that. I do want that. Like, I don't want anyone to misconstrue. I love that. But to Dusty's point out, at what cost are we, surrounding ourselves in this like fake kumbaya? So I would much rather, be in constant discomfort, which I feel like I live my life in right now, to create a better world for the next Jameses, the next Fridas, now, than continue the track that we're on.
Yeah. James Baldwin, one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin, Michelle, is, "We can agree to disagree and love each other unless your disagreement is the root of my oppression." Right? That's where we have an issue. So you're right. I think there are a lot of superficial unity and peace, right, without confrontation, accountability. And if we're going to do this work, we need to be able to confront and hold people accountable for the ways in which their behavior and even their ideologies are oppressive to people of color, right? And so we cannot have peace without justice. And the work of justice is to confront and hold people accountable. So we close out. Thank you. Let me say, I am so moved by this conversation here. I'm so moved by these young people who are just bright. And so thank you for your bravery and for leaning into this conversation. And I want to take this opportunity to offer you an opportunity to close out with closing statements. And I'm going to start with you, Dusty, and then I'm going to go to you, Frida, and then James. Closing statements, anything you would like the audience to know as we close out in this place. Dusty.
Wow, I didn't prepare a closing statement, so I feel very unprepared at the moment. But I would just say that I'm leaving this conversation really invigorated with this work. I think that a lot of us feel, especially after the election results have finally trickled in, that we're at a turning point. And so this might be a good time to embrace change. And I've got work to do. I think we've all got work to do. And so it's time to embrace that, and it's time to do it.
Yes, thank you, Dusty, for being here both weeks, and also for bringing Jaden with you this week in such powerful conversation, and even the model that the two of you offered in terms of what it looks like for a father and son to have conversation about race in the household. Thank you so much for your generosity of time and wisdom. Frida, I'm so grateful to meet you, to know your name. I am excited about our future because of you. And I want to offer you an opportunity to offer closing statements. What words of advice would you give our audience as it relates to this conversation?
I would like the audience to read, and for you guys to read, Ghost Boys. It's about black boys getting killed by officers just because they're either playing around or the officers feel threatened, like if they're suspicious or anything. And my mom was the one that recommended me this book. She bought it for me, and I really liked it. And that people's genders, people's colors, and any tech doesn't matter, as like everyone should love each other just for being who they are.
Listen, Frida came with a book recommendation, y'all. Ghost Boys. Come on, Ghost Boys. I'm looking it up now, and we'll have it on in the comments there. Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker Rhodes. Hey, let me encourage you to pick up this book that Frida recommended. I'm going to buy it even now as I click. Thank you so much, Frida, for your generosity of time and for your wisdom. The way you showed up in this conversation, I'm just thrilled to know your name and so grateful for you. And I truly am excited about our future because of you. Thank you. Thank you. And please be sure to thank your parents for allowing you to join us in this conversation. James Jean-Marie, I want to offer you an opportunity to offer words of wisdom as we leave this place.
I'll just say, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable, because like through those uncomfortable situations you're in, it's also like a time for growth. So like, just go for it and like try to be more like open-minded and get different perspectives on issues with race and politics and stuff like that. But it's been an awesome discussion, getting to hear from different perspectives and different people and things like that. But yeah, thank you guys.
James Jean-Marie, I'm a little impartial because that is my baby boy, my nephew. I am so proud of you. Just love hearing you speak of your experience and just watching you engage in this conversation. I am so proud of you. You sure know how to put a smile on my face. Love you, and so thank you for your the opportunity just to do this work with you today, and your time and generosity. Thank you. I'm so grateful for you, and I love you with all of my heart. Thank you. Lucero, if you would share your closing remarks as it relates to this conversation here.
Yes, well, muchas gracias a todos. Like, thank you for the space. It's been really amazing. It's been a blessing to work with everyone, educators to the students, and listening in, right? And that's like one of the key words that we've been saying, like, make sure that we're listening, especially with these different perspectives. And for the families and parents at home, make sure that you demand these items, this new curriculum, perspectives. Make sure that African American studies is involved, Mexican American studies is involved, Asian American studies, all these kinds of perspectives are involved in your curriculum. You can demand this in your state board. You go beyond that to go to your state board and all this great stuff, because it all happens with grassroots. It all happens with the community, and these are all things that we all need. These are our rights. We should learn our own histories, right? It shouldn't just be one perspective. It should be all of us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lucero, for both weeks you came. And one thing I appreciate about you is you're consistently reminding us in these conversations, all of you, that this is not a black-white conversation. The world is so much more diverse than black-white. Thank you. Thank you for your time, your wisdom, your generosity of time, and for the ways you're reminding us how to decolonize our curriculum in the classroom, which is such important work for educators to do. Thank you. Thank you. Michelle, would you offer your words of wisdom as we leave this place?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you. I've enjoyed these past 2 weeks. You know, normally Sundays aren't this intense, but I've appreciated kind of being pushed, you know, for my own life, but being able to, you know, offer some words of encouragement for others as well. I think my closing remarks today is just going to be progress, not perfection. Recognize that this work, you'll never be perfect. I do always feel, even now being in my space, that I'm still learning. I don't always say the right thing. I have not maybe completely healed from some of the things that I have been socialized to believe about myself, my race, other people. And so I'm constantly unpacking that. And so I say progress, not perfection, because taking one small step is better than not taking one at all. And know that we are here. You've got people in your community, people like us, educators, who are willing to help you, you know, in this journey. So use us. Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle, for being here both weeks and offering such great wisdom and guidance in this conversation. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate you spending time with my nephew last night, prepping for this conversation. Thank you. You are so appreciated. And last, surely but not least, Justin, my co-conspirator in planning these last 2 weeks, this conversation. Justin, I want to give you time to offer words of wisdom, your last words of wisdom. Before I say that, I do want to acknowledge that Dr. Andre had some difficulties, so he could not finish out this session here, but we're so grateful for him and his daughter, and such great, modeling of father-daughter conversations this afternoon. We want to acknowledge and appreciate him and his daughter, Sammy. Justin, let me turn it over to you for words, your closing remarks.
Thank you so much. And again, I just want to say thank you again to you, Shursna, to the Scarritt Bennett Center, to all of our participants, for the educators, for the children. This experience for me has been incredibly remarkable and moving and inspiring, and allowing me to do one thing that I always strive to do, which is to persevere. And so that's what I leave you with today, along with the same idea of progress from Michelle. I want to leave you with the idea of perseverance. It is difficult in the world that we live in. It may not be easy every single day. And there are times that you wake up and you say, you know what? I don't think that I can do it today. I can't participate. I can't go to another rally. I can't have another post online. I can't talk to another person about this. And I want you to know that those feelings are okay, that those feelings are normal, and that sometimes you do need to take care of yourself. But at the end of that, remember that people like me, people like James, like Lucero, Frida, Jaden, Sammy, Andre, and everybody else, Michelle, Dusty, who are on these calls, we depend on you to persevere, to continue to fight for what is right, to not ignore when you see something that goes wrong, to not be a bystander, but to stand in this work with us, to be right next to us, and to sometimes defend us, right? To persevere when you feel like you can't move on anymore, because that's what we have been forced to do. Black people have been forced to persevere. Natives have been forced to persevere. We have been brought to this country, or bondage in this country, or restricted in this country, and still we persevere. So I ask all of you to persevere with us in those darkest times. Persevere.
Thank you. It is way past our time, but it was so worth it to be in conversation with each and every one of you. Thank you, viewers, for watching, and we will see you again next week. God bless you. Bye-bye.